Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, awesome admins. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Metrics Worth Measuring Aligned Business Goals to Salesforce Adoption webinar. My name is Mark Baisman, and I am a new admin evangelist here at Salesforce. I am joined today by the wonderful Kevin Richardson. Kevin is an SC Enablement Senior Manager and spent 5 years as a Customer Success Manager at Salesforce, focused on turning his customers' goals and objectives into reality with Salesforce. Welcome, Kevin. Would you introduce yourself?
You bet, Mark. Happy to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, awesome admins. I'm really excited to be here and share this content today.
Thanks, Kevin. So it wouldn't be a great webinar without a forward-looking statement slide. Just a quick note that you should only base your purchasing decisions on products and services that are currently available. Of course, we want to invite you to connect with us. We are on all of the social things, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, and the YouTubes. So definitely check us out on social. And before you panic, yes, this webinar is definitely being recorded. It's being recorded right now, and it's going to be posted at this bit.ly link, and it will also be on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that. Also, for Q&A, please join the admin webinar group in the Trailblazer community. You do not need to wait until the end of this webinar to ask a question. You could even start asking questions right now, and we'll make sure to address them. So we're going to be in there. We'll do a live Q&A at the end of this webinar, and we'll address any questions that you've asked during the webinar there as well. And we'll also be hanging out in that group following the webinar shortly. So we'll be there. Come meet us there. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about defining those metrics that matter. We're going to talk about putting those metrics into practice, what to do when things don't go as planned, responding to those warnings. I'll share a couple of resources, and then we'll, time permitting, do some live Q&A. So with that, let me turn it over to Kevin. Take it away, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. As Mark said, I spent 5 years in our customer success group. What he didn't share is that I spent 9 years before that as a customer, as an admin. So I've been where you are. Love the admin community and appreciate the time that you're taking out of your busy day to hopefully learn something new, think of something in a different way, and take something back that you can use today. So let's start here. We're all familiar with goals. Maybe you made New Year's resolutions about 30 days ago. Maybe you're still following those, maybe you aren't, but we know how to set goals for ourselves, our families, and our work. To achieve those goals, we have to break things down, though, into simple, meaningful steps. And we want to highlight those simple, meaningful steps today and give you some nuggets to walk away with that'll help you break down adoption into things that you can measure easily, that your users will do regularly, and that you can then show the results that you want to see within your organization, that your users and your leadership expects. So I know I've been in the habit of setting goals for many, many years and working toward them, but that all changed one day when I got a Fitbit. This was several years ago. Got a Fitbit and started to look at what it was tracking. And noticed that our Fitbits don't just focus on a long-term goal like weight loss. In fact, Fitbit itself won't track that for you at all. You have to tie something else into it or track that separately. It does, though, help us focus on intermediate points along the way that are indicators of how we're progressing to our goal. So first, there can be activities that we're doing every single day. We call those leading metrics. So these are the things that we do first, putting the first things first, the things that we decide to do early in pursuit of a goal. Then there are the things that result from those leading metrics. So if a leading metric is something that we start with, then the next step along the way is a leaning metric, which shows an intermediate result. And we'll get into some examples of all these in just a minute. And then finally is what we're used to, and that's the lagging metric. That's the goal itself. So we're familiar with that last step, but I want to show you today how all three of these work together to make adoption even more meaningful to you and your business. So let's dive in and take a closer look at each one of these.
Let's hear some examples. I want to hear some real life examples of this.
We're going to do it, Mark. Yes. So to better understand these, let's put them first in context of a health goal as an example. And then Mark is going to follow up each one of these with a business and Salesforce example of a leading, leaning, and lagging metric. So let's start with leading. I mentioned my Fitbit. It tracks my steps each and every day. What is my step count? Have I gotten my 10,000 in? Where am I right now? And if my goal is to lose weight, one of the ways that I work to achieve that goal is by moving around more. So knowing how many steps that I have tells me that I'm doing the right thing. If you have an Apple Watch, it's a little bit different, but they measure the same types of things. You have a movement goal, an exercise goal, and a standing goal. So it's getting you to do something early and often that's going to lead to something else. So the makers of these devices know that we respond to immediate feedback, and they built those leading metrics right into the device. And they work, because I know when I got my Fitbit, there were multiple times, and still are times, that I will look at it towards the end of the day, realize that I'm just a couple of hundred steps from my goal, and I'll go walking around the house, or I'll go out for another quick walk with the dogs or something to hit that goal. I want to do that. So because we're aware of the metric and how it ties to our goal, we make an effort to close those rings or reach for that next step. Understanding that leading metrics help in a health context is one thing, but now let's take a look at them in the context of business and using Salesforce to track leading metrics. Take us through that, Mark.
You bet, Kevin. So let's talk about this in the context of Salesforce. So, when I think about leading metrics in a Salesforce context, I think about activities. What activities do my users need to do to complete that will kickstart their progress towards a business goal? So let's take the example of increasing revenue or doing a nonprofit fundraising campaign. With that as a goal, we break down the process to its very first step and find that our leading metrics is, say, the number of prospect or donor calls in a particular week. We know that focusing on making a certain number of calls per week will create more opportunities for a sale or donation later on. So that's the first metric that we want our reps or our fundraising team to focus on. So leading metrics point us in the right direction by putting those first things first, and they guide us towards the results that we want to achieve. So now we'll add to this measure with another metric that's an indicator of early success and an additional support towards our goal. And one more thing, I will just say, man, I love getting that little 10,000 steps notification on my Fitbit. I am like a Pavlov's dog with that. I try to get that every time. So when I think of leading metrics in a Salesforce context, I think about activities. What activities do my users need to complete that will kickstart their progress towards a business goal? So let's take the example of increasing revenue or driving a nonprofit fundraising campaign. With that as a goal, we're going to break down that process to its very first step and find that our leading metric here is the number of prospect or donor calls every week. So we know that focusing on making a certain number of calls every week will create more opportunities for a sale or a donation later on. So that's the first metric that we want our folks to focus on. So leading metrics point us in the right direction by putting those first things first, and they guide us towards our results. So now we'll add to this measure with another metric that's an indicator of early success and additional support towards our goal. Just a personal note, I personally love the 10,000 step indicator on my Fitbit. I definitely am a Pavlov dog for that. I try to get my 10,000 steps. So anyway, over to you, Kevin.
Leaning metrics. Let's talk about leaning metrics. So once we have determined what we want to track first, that's going to lead to something else, or it should. That's what we want it to do. So if we follow our healthcare example, or being healthier physically, if we're taking more steps, something should happen as a result. And in this case, what you can see is by moving more, I should be burning more calories. So in this case, burning more calories is my leaning metric. And when I combine it together with my leading metric, I can see a correlation between the two. The more steps that I take, the more calories I burn, and the assumption then is I'm going to be more healthy. I don't know that yet. I haven't gotten all the way to the end of my 3 metrics, but that is part of the process to get me there. I know that burning calories is a good thing, and I know that the key here is to realize that correlation between leading and leaning metrics. The leading metric should always lead us towards the leaning metric, and the leaning metric, we'll find in just a minute, is going to lean towards our goal. That's why we call them leading and leaning. But before we get to our final metric, Mark, take a look at this through the business context.
You bet. So let's talk about this in terms of your business context. So if our leading metric that we just talked about is our number of prospect or donor calls every week, I want to make sure that, as Kevin said, my leaning metric ties to my leading metric. So meetings or exceeding my prospect call metric each week should then correlate to a greater number of qualified leads and opportunities. So this leaning metric also happens to be the next milestone in my sales process or my fundraising process. And that can serve as a good rule of thumb for determining your leading and then leaning metrics. So now that we've talked about these leading and leaning metrics, let's talk about the results of our efforts. Kevin, back to you.
You bet. So with leading and leaning metrics, and I hope that those 2 words are getting burned into your mind, because they can be very powerful tools in the hands of an admin. I hope that you're seeing that they are guiding us toward something. And they are. They're guiding us towards our 3rd metric, which is the lagging metric. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our lagging metric is the one that we're most familiar with. It may be closed business, or it could be something else that is the thing that you track on a dashboard. It's the end result that you're looking for. If we use our health example again, the way we would complete that with a lagging metric is, I want better physical health, so I'm going to take more steps in a day. I'm going to have more calories burned. And if I do those things, I'm going to have weight loss, which is going to help me be a healthier person. And you can see on the screen that I am 5.2 pounds to go to reach my goal. So right here on my dashboard, it's actually showing me that I am achieving the results that I want to achieve by focusing on the steps and the calories burned. And while we're here, think about how all 3 of these working together can help as we think about the job that we want our users to do. I take more steps. If that's down, I know I need to do more of that. If I'm burning a certain number of calories, that's not only going to help me know I'm doing the right thing, but it's probably going to guide how much I put into my body, because I want that to be less than the amount that I am eating. So having these 3 metrics in front of me, much like the dashboard on a car, gives me all the information that I need in pursuit of a goal. And this is another one that we want to tie back now to a business context. So Mark, take us through that.
Thanks, Kevin. So remember, our goal was to increase our revenue or increase our donations. So we first focused on the number of prospect calls or donor calls a week. Our leaning metric was to then track an increase in the qualified leads and opportunities created that will result in that additional closed business. So our final metric here is to increase our closed business, right? So these three metrics work together in support of our goal to get that revenue, right? So we should have a bunch more closed won opportunities here. And these metrics together will help focus our users on the key things that we want them to do to be successful. So Kevin, we can see now how these metrics work together in support of a goal, but how do we help our users see beyond the idea that this is a management tracking tool, which is one of the often things that folks talk to us about?
Oh, absolutely. It comes up all the time. So as you start to introduce more and more things that show progress towards a goal, you're naturally going to get pushback. Why are we looking at this? Why are we tracking this? The key to success here is to determine what those metrics are and then show your users how it helps them to achieve whatever their goals are. So if the lagging metric you're going after is more closed business and you're talking to a salesperson, make it personal for them. By working these three metrics, these leading, leaning, and lagging metrics, they are going to not only help the company achieve the goal, but more money in their pocket or a promotion, whatever it is that they are wanting to achieve. In fact, sometimes you can ask them, well, what's important to you? What are you really driving for? No doubt, if you have built these metrics with the right alignment, you'll be able to show them how it ties back to them, and then you've got them. One more time with the health example. I bought my Fitbit and didn't really care about being better with my health until I made it personal for me. I wore the thing on my wrist. I saw that I was tracking a certain number of steps, but it wasn't until I made it personal for me and really thought about what was in it for me that I started getting value out of the numbers that were there. So find out what's valuable to your users, put that in front of them, tie it back to these metrics and show them how they correlate. So let's take a look at an example of how that might look. And what you'll see on the next slide as we put these metrics into practice is just a visual that I put together of what this might look like for a company in a way that you can talk to the company from bottom to top, from user all the way up to top leadership.
So talk us through this, Kevin. There's a lot here, so walk us through this thing.
Yeah, this is very busy, but there is a way to walk through this. If you start on the left, this is a corporate objective. We want to increase new business revenue 15%. So then we go and talk to the management team in sales, and they say, well, they have a revenue growth goal of 20% in their win rate. And we can tie those two together. Well, if we get more win rate, we're going to increase new business. But how do we increase that new business? If we look at that gray box is our lagging metric. So we need to now build a leading and a leaning metric in support of that lagging metric. And this is where the magic of the admin comes in, because you know what can be tracked in Salesforce. You also know your company's sales processes, service processes, or if you're in a nonprofit, the processes that you use with your donors. And you know how to tie this together to be that glue. So create a leading metric. In this case, we are building our lead engine, and a leaning metric around pipeline growth that then feeds that lagging metric of an increased win rate. And when you tie those three together and then sit down with all of the key stakeholders to explain to them and walk them through this, just as I am walking you through it now, they'll be able to make that connection And if you're looking at this the same way I am, you're already seeing, my gosh, there's 3 or 4 dashboard elements that would be really meaningful. So the dashboard builds itself as a result of having something like this. And also you can use this as an ongoing action plan. If you look over on the right-hand side, this is something that I used with customers in the 5 years I was in CSG to help them communicate with each other about the key actions that each group was taking. Maybe sales leadership was going to get more defined in their sales process, and the admin team was going to then take that new sales process and map it to the key Salesforce features that meet it and build the dashboard, let's say. So that's a great example of what you can do with leading, leaning, and lagging metrics to pull them together into a story that users can understand and see where they fit in, as well as your leadership. And what we have next here is an example of a company's top 3 potential objectives in sales, in upsell, cross-sell, and even in service, and how those metrics then tie in. So if you put your dashboard hat on, you can see a number of elements all in one screen that could help leadership keep track of things and know where they are and have their finger on the pulse of things, and also an action plan. So I hope that helps kind of pull this together into something that you can tell a story with, not only to your leaders, but also to your user base.
Awesome. So Kevin, this is fantastic. And I love the actions on the right that the admin can take. And I appreciate that there's also some things that the business might need to do as well. And the admin might be working with the business unit representative or collecting folks together to figure out what those actions are. Mm-hmm. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, and next slide, please. Let's say things don't go well. So in fact, we've got our leading or our leaning indicators look like they're trending positively, but actually, later on down the line, we're not getting the results that we expect. What do we do?
Sure. So when I get this question, I get excited, because if we are seeing something trend in the right direction and something trend in the, say, wrong direction, that is either a key that maybe we're not tracking things the right way if we're expecting them to be right, or if we know we're tracking the right things, we now have an opportunity to go and educate and train. And so if you look at the example here on the screen, we have a dashboard element of prospect calls per week going up and going up in a very positive way, a very healthy way. And if you look at the element on the right, we have qualified opportunities per week that follow along with that as we think they should, and then all of a sudden it kind of craters. And so that is an element we'd want to dig into. And first, let's make sure that we're actually tracking this the right way. Once we know we've done that, then let's dig into this a little further and figure out who are the reps, who are the people that we need to go and have some conversations with to make sure that they are trained on how to ask those prospects the right questions to be able to best qualify them. And then we're able to watch this leading metric, prospect calls, and this leading metric and qualified opportunities after the training. We should see a correlation again in growth on both sides.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. So we have some great resources for you all to check out, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. I see some great questions here. So we wanted to break these resources down a little bit. I think you're used to seeing just a list of resources. We wanted to give you resources for now, next, and later. So the now resources, things that you should do right away or shortly after this webinar. So we've given you the V2 Mom badge. Really, this is just about identifying your leading, leaning, and lagging metrics. You probably have the lagging metrics already, but now you can think about what those leaning and leading metrics are. Also on Facebook today, on the Salesforce admins page, we're going to be doing a live webinar chat. I don't know the word because I'm too old, but we're going to be doing a thing with Salesforce adoption services. So that is just in 30 minutes after the conclusion of this webinar, 11 a.m. Pacific. So the next things you should do: measurement to adopt. There's some great YouTube videos here. This is, I think this is a previous webinar, and of course the admin's blog, and there's a Salesforce adoption trail map. So I want to make sure to get to our question here. So let's go next. So wrapping up, admin webinar group, you're already in there, hopefully, asking questions. There will be a survey. Please fill out the survey after this webinar. Let us know what you thought. And the slides are available online for you to download at that bit.ly URL. So let's get to the good stuff here. Let's get to the Q&A.
All right.
So I think there's a great question here specifically about what are the examples of leading, leaning, and lagging metrics around higher user adoption? So instead of the business goal, right, where we're driving closed won opportunities, what are the leading, leaning, and lagging metrics for user adoption? So you as the admin, what should we be looking at?
Sure. Yeah, so I like the way you framed that up, Mark, because I think it's important to keep in mind that that's a metric that an admin's going to want to look at. But I would caution anyone in showing those metrics to the business because every time I talk to business leaders, they really don't care who's logging in, or they won't care for long before they want to see business results coming out of the application. But for admins who are either launching a new org or they've just made some major changes and they want to see how things are going, a great example of a leading metric is that login. And if they're logging in, then they should be doing something as a result of logging in. So find that thing that you want them to do.
Data, right? Creating
exactly.
Something like that, or creating activities.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Creating activities, creating accounts, creating opportunities, creating something. And then for a lagging metric, I think that's where you could start to transition to some sort of business related metric. So they're logging in more, they're creating opportunities, and as a result, our pipeline has grown 38%.
That's great. Awesome. All right, I see here we're right at time. So I just want to thank everyone so much for attending today's webinar. We really hope you found it valuable. There's the survey link. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, Kevin. Really, really appreciate all your fantastic expertise.
You bet. And Mark, we are going to be going into the community group and continuing to answer these questions, right?
We sure are. We're going to go right now.
I will see you there.
We'll see you there. Thanks, everyone.